Hi everyone, myself Shubhajit Datta, and today is the day 5 of our event, Participate to Innovate. So I request Mr. Saptarshi বিশ্বাস, the CEO of Novacal Technologies, to continue this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shubhajit. Just to give a short introduction about Arka Mukhopadhay. He had been my school senior, and since then I have seen him in the school as a celebrity who used to go to all the classes with his records and cups and the awards that he used to get from the college and school quiz team. He was leading that team with other guys. And at the time, I remember we used to see him in TVs. And we always used to wait when we will see him live. And he used to come with and enlighten us with his amazing knowledge. So today, he would be providing us with a master class of how to concentrate or move forward in a steady, fruitful way. I don't want to extend with all these words, but request Arkoda to carry forward.
Thank you, Saptarshi. That's quite an introduction, tough to live up to. So, okay, so what is this session about? So it's essentially based on a program that I do for organizations, so business organizations like corporates or educational organizations. And it's on well-being, simply. So that probably a lot of us know that it's one of the biggest areas of focus these days for in the last, even before the pandemic and especially after this pandemic situation started. So this whole thing of workplace well-being, employee well-being, etc., that has become like a huge focus area. So yeah, this is mainly, like this program is mainly designed keeping like a workplace in mind. But then what I have to share, I believe and I hope it kind of applies to our lives in general, of which work is, of course, like a part, a very significant, important part, but it's not just confined to the workplace, it applies to life in general. So, well-being can mean so many different things, and there's no one single way of looking at it, so they're all equally valid, etc. It could, I mean, generally when we hear well-being, I think people immediately think of physical health, physically healthy or not, which is, of course, very important. And physical health itself has many different dimensions. I mean, my externally active and fit, am I like, my immunity, am I subject to diseases, etc., etc. Beyond that, again, in recent years, we've become a lot more aware of mental health and mental well-being. And previously, there was no conversation about this, or if at all, there was a lot of stigma, like, and people wouldn't talk about mental health challenges and so on and so forth. So now that has changed quite a lot. So even in the corporate world, where there is so much pressure, etc., but there's a lot of conversation around mental health and the importance of, supporting mental health, even from like a purely business perspective, because it leads to more productive workplaces. Like if people are extremely stressed and depressed and under anxiety and feeling threatened and mentally unsafe, it does not translate into a very productive workplace, regardless of the size. And something I'll touch upon later, but just because it's coming to me. So we also often think that these things apply only to big organizations, while the truth is that in some ways it probably applies to startups even more, because there's like, hardly any resources, a lot more stress, and as a result, like, in very small teams, so yeah, exponentially greater stress, and mental health often suffers. Okay, so physical health, well-being, mental well-being, and also what is being called emotional well-being, which is similar to, but not exactly the same as just, so it's mental health and emotional well-being as a kind of complex that people talk about. So the way I'm looking at well-being covers, yes, our physical health, our mental health, emotional health, and I add another dimension to that, which is the health of our imagination also, because I believe that's equally critical and equally important. Yeah, it's again something that I'll get into a little bit deeper later on in the session. So physical well-being, mental well-being, emotional well-being, as well as, there isn't a short way of putting it, but yeah, the well-being of our imagination, Simply put, it's actually not too tough to understand. These days we're talking so much about creativity, etc., right? Creativity and innovation. And so all those things essentially depend on the imagination, on our ability to sort of remain curious, etc., etc. So how do we ensure that we have well-being of our imagination as well? And the thing is that all these things are interconnected. That's the part, that all these things are interconnected. They're not like cut off from, independent of each other. If we are, a simple example is that if we are physically really unwell, then we cannot feel mentally very happy, right? It's like axiomatic. It's just not possible. Like suppose you've got like a fever and a lot of throat ache or whatever, you cannot be feeling really happy and positive in that moment. I mean, yes, as an adult, your mind knows that, yeah, it's just a fever, but still you'd be feeling a little like, you wouldn't be feeling super charged up and happy. What is less obvious is that mental health also affects our physical health. I mean, it shouldn't be less obvious because, again, it's an integrated system, is what our body is. Like since I guess we're all mostly from technical backgrounds or scientific backgrounds, so to look at it a little scientifically, the human body, the human being is like what scientists would call a complex dynamic system, a self-regulating complex dynamic system. That's a very kind of mechanical way of looking at a human being, but that in a way is what we are. Not just self-regulating and complex and dynamic, it's also an adaptive system. That's what we do through our lives, right? Essentially, that's what we do. And in turn, our society is also a complex, dynamic, adaptive system. So we are systems, within up to the whole earth in a way and beyond that. I mean, I quite often find it quite useful to look at it that way, in a sort of a systemic way of looking at it. Because then we can think of like, so how does the system remain in balance? And balance in this case, like how does it remain in an optimal state? Not in some kind of stable equilibrium, because there is no such thing in nature, right? So we can only keep something in a kind of an optimal dynamic equilibrium. And so with me, like, so there is no perfect state of health, whether physical or mental. It's an ever-morphing, ever-changing, ever-adapting system from birth to death. Like quite literally, the very cells that our bodies are made of are dying constantly, are being regenerated constantly. So nothing remains the same. So it's like, important to understand. And I feel that that's a helpful perspective to take. Like rather than looking at the body as a kind of a black box, or the human being as a sort of a black box, and you can very mechanically tinker around with it. That doesn't really hold good anymore. I mean, that's how we looked at it in the 19th century or 20th century also, but to look at it as a sort of constantly shifting, changing system is, I feel, a better frame. Okay, which means that pretty much every part of it affects every other part of it, right? It is like, for example, we talk about different systems within the body, your nervous system and your respiratory system, your digestive system. But the truth is that there isn't a nervous system walking around or a digestive system walking around. There's a human being walking around. At a physical level also, different aspects of the body affect each other. But what is going on mentally, which ultimately, obviously, there's very little that we still understand of the human brain and human consciousness. Even with the most cutting-edge advances of modern neuroscience and all that, we understand next to nothing. But at least this much that, yes, whatever we call mental processes, etc., but that is also manifesting through physical means, through biological means, through chemical secretions in the brain, through hormones, etc., etc. So, for example, mental stress obviously manifests physically in a number of, in a whole gamut of ways, from aches and pains. I mean, when we are very mentally stressed, often we feel a lot of back pain and neck pain and shoulder pain, etc., to things like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and so on and so forth. So obviously, mental stress affects, or our mental state, rather, since we're speaking about systems. So as soon as we talk of a system is always in a certain state, and it shifts from one state to another like that, right? So the mental state affects our physical state as well, and so on and so forth. So that's just to set a kind of ground for how we are looking at this, how we are looking at well-being, that whatever environment we are in, because we are never in a vacuum, whether we are at home, at the workplace, so those are micro-environments which are within the bigger social environment, and so on and so forth. So that environment itself is a system, and within that, we are all systems, and we are kind of constantly interacting, exchanging energies, literally and metaphorically, with each other. So that's the basic framework that we are taking. So then how to kind of keep this thing in an optimal state. Okay, so how? So then how do we, what are the things we can do to ensure well-being, and so on and so forth? Again, since this was primarily designed for the corporate world, so what do we see there? That by and large, it's like you have a separate, a bunch of measures for the physical health of employees, like a doctor on call, whatever, physical checkups, insurance, whatever HR policies companies come up with. And then you usually have a counselor on call also. Both very, very important. That's fine. And those are specialized things, not my area of expertise. Of course, I'm not a counselor or a mental health professional. So those are in their own place. Other than that, and perhaps at a simpler level, what are some of the things that we can look at? Where the kind of work that I do, what I can share. So, as far as physical health is concerned, the thing is that the very structure, the way in which we work or study, even before that, is actually not a very healthy way of doing it, as in, it's primarily sedentary. It involves sitting for hours and hours and hours and trying to be constantly productive. The problem is that we're not designed in that way, right? I mean, we've achieved an extraordinary amount of technological progress in a really short span of time, in historical or geological terms, like not even an instant. But our bodies haven't really fundamentally changed from the time we were hunter-gatherers. We still have hunter-gatherer bodies, very diminished, weakened hunter-gatherer bodies, but hunter-gatherer bodies, and essentially hunter-gatherer brains also. Because, again, there's been no significant evolutionary change in the, other than, yes, we've discovered speech, so that actually has changed the biology in some ways. But fundamental, there's no huge change in Homo sapiens brains, let's say, in the last 15,000 years. So it's a certain kind of body and a certain kind of brain, which, however, is existing in a way that is not natural to it. Sitting for hours and hours and hours is not natural and certainly not healthy for the human body. It is one of the most unhealthy things that we can do, leading primarily to, again, a lot of physical problems, in turn leading on to reduced mental efficiency and productivity, etc., etc. So what are some of the things we can do to counter that? And then what are some of the things we can do to kind of be mentally more focused, etc., etc. So here's what it then breaks down into. A basic set of what we call mindfulness practices. So, what that is, what are the things we can do, etc. So that's the mental well-being part of it. And very simple physical practices to kind of, partly to counter this, the harmful effects of having to be sedentary for so long. So how to maybe change the way we are at work, etc. And also, even in life in general, how to use our bodies more efficiently. As simple as that. And the imagination part we will come to. So, starting with the mindfulness part. So here's where we get into a little bit of practical work. So what I'll do is as we share some of these practices, I'll also share my thoughts or suggestions on how these can be integrated into, let's say, one's personal schedule or, into a workplace schedule kind of a thing, that way. Which is what I do when I'm taking sessions for organizations also. Mindfulness can be anything. The other day I was doing the talk and I kind of mentioned in my description also that it's a very popular buzzword these days, but it's also a very, very misunderstood term. Simply put, anything that we are doing with our full attention is a mindful activity. As simple as that, right? It does not specifically have to be meditation or something like that. Anything that we are doing, whether that's playing cricket or badminton, or if you're really listening to a song with your full attention, anything can be a mindfulness activity. But at the same time, because something that your mind is doing all the time, so it doesn't see anything special in it, so there are certain practices that we kind of take out, isolate as, okay, mindfulness exercises, so to say. So what are these? What are some simple ways? The most basic, the most fundamental is mindfulness through breathing, and we'll get more into and do all of these things. Secondly, mindfulness through walking, certain mindfulness techniques based on walking. Thirdly, mindfulness through movement. Okay, so let's look at them and let's experience them one by one. Mindfulness through breathing, this is quote unquote meditation. This is what most of us identify with as mindfulness. And a lot of it has come from traditional Buddhist practices, Buddhist philosophies, etc. I mean, many different cultures, religions have approached, similar, like have had similar ideas and practices. But in the modern world, when we talk about mindfulness, more than anything else, we are essentially borrowing from Buddhist practices. So the simplest of these, and supposedly the only practice that the Buddha himself taught, very, very simple and at the same time extremely profound, is just practicing breath awareness. Okay, so what does that mean? Let's do this practically and, experience for ourselves. So here's what we are going to do. Let's just as we are sitting, but I'm going to invite you to sit up a little bit. Yeah, you don't have to be rigid or something. Just as you're sitting, be comfortable. So just don't slump, because we've been speaking for a while and, the weather is also like that. So it's very natural for the mind's focus to just go down. So don't slump and all. Just sit up straight, but sit comfortably. Close your eyes. Why? Because it's not that we have to close our eyes. It's just that as soon as we close our eyes, we cut out a lot of visual stimuli. And so it's easier to focus. So what do we focus on? We're just going to focus only for 2 minutes to start with. Nothing else. Only for 2 minutes. For 2 minutes, when I say start, we're going to focus only on the physical sensation of how we breathe in and breathe out. Physically, we're not aware of this because this is so natural to the body, so we don't pay attention to it. But if we close our eyes, cut our minds off from everything else and purely focus on this, then we realize that there's a kind of a physical sensation when the breath enters the nostril and it exits the nostril. Just as if you closed your eyes and, used your right hand to touch your left hand. You'd feel that, right? Be aware of it. Just like that, there is a physical sensation when the breath enters through the nostril and exits through the nostril. And I just want you to focus on that. So I'll count, I'll set a timer so that we actually can kind of, do it like that. Just give me a moment. Ready? Okay, so let's sit up, we'll close our eyes and start. So we don't need to change, we don't need to try to breathe deeply, nothing like that. It's not pranayama, it's not a breathing exercise. All it asks you to do is just pay attention to the breath. Focus on the breath. Which means that right now, whatever mental state you were in, howsoever you were breathing, that is okay, that's all right. We just watch, we just observe. Are you breathing fast or slow? That's as it is, it's fine. Deep, shallow, long, short, it can be so many different things, right? We just observe. How am I breathing? Right, let's open our eyes. That was just 2 minutes. It felt like a very, very long time, I'm sure. Yeah. So that one thing, you know, where that points out to us is like, that the sense of time is relative, but that's a minor point, let that be. How difficult it is, especially in this day and age with so many distractions and with, you know, the social media devices doing what they are to our bodies and brains. I just said some time ago that we haven't fundamentally evolved that much from 15 years ago, but now I think these devices are literally changing the structure of our brains in harmful ways. But anyway, how difficult it is to just purely focus on the breath and nothing else. In other words, just be, like not doing anything, we're not doing anything at all, just being for just 2 minutes. That's it, yeah? So a lot comes out of that. We'll go back to this and we'll add a few more layers, but a lot comes out of that immediately. One is like practically something that we can do that just this kind of a little 2-minute mindfulness break, if we call it that, can be integrated into our work schedule also, right? As I said, it's very simple, doesn't mean it's easy. It's actually not a very easy thing to do at all, but as we explore, as we find that it has a lot of immense benefits. Generally, like from whatever little I've read and, you know, experience and found through experience that it's generally not a good idea to try and work at a stretch for more than an hour. Even that's too much sometimes. So what works best is like working for a certain stretch of time, then consciously, like, you know, shutting down or pausing, then going back to whatever it is that we were doing. That actually keeps us at a far higher productivity level. So for example, a suggestion I often give is that for ideally every 30 minutes, for every 30 minutes that we're trying to work, we actually work for roughly 28 minutes and just spend 2 minutes just focusing on the breath. Yeah, if that's not possible, at least for every hour we can spend a couple of minutes doing this, right? So what we just did, as I said, I mean, these come from traditional Buddhist meditation practices. There's a name for this. They just call it anapanasati, which literally means just watching the inflow and the outflow of the breath. Why is this like of any value at all? For many, many reasons. In a sort of strange way, it brings us face to face with how inherently prone to distraction our minds are, right? So forget meditating for half an hour or an hour or something, just trying to do it for 2 minutes also. Initially, it feels like a tremendous ask. The mind is kind of, I mean, a part of our minds, the most visible, dominant, active part, is constantly asking to be engaged in some way or the other. Like an analogy would be like a small child who's demanding either attention or things to do, things to play with all the time. So we think we grow up, but even as adults, we're just constantly crowding our minds with things and giving those things the illusion of importance. I mean, well, maybe some of them are, most of them are not, but we're just constantly making things up to fill our minds with. And like how difficult it is to not do that just for 2 minutes and just to purely allow the mind to rest. Right? Why should we even want to do that, etc.? Let's kind of, go step by step. Okay, so we'll go back to this same exercise, right, of purely watching the breath, but we'll go a little bit deeper this time. Okay, so again, this time for 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, we're going to close our eyes again. So we're again going to sit up, close our eyes, and again, we just focus on the breath. As the breath is flowing in and as the breath is flowing out, we're just watching it, we're just noting how's the breath flowing in, how is it flowing out. But then we go a little bit deeper, so we focus mentally on, let's say, on our face, like our forehead, our face, our, the jaw, the cheekbones, etc. And what does it mean to focus? It's like you're mentally scanning the body. So does it feel relaxed, or is my face frowning and all tightened? Do I experience any tension in the sort of skin and muscles of the face? How about the forehead? How about the cheeks? How about especially the jaws, especially the lower jaw? Does it feel tensed? Do I sense any tension? Or does it feel relaxed? If it feels tense, can I just kind of send a mental instruction, a mental signal to that particular part, just asking it to relax? Like in our minds, we just say this word over and over again, to relax. So we're mentally scanning the forehead, the cheeks, the jaws, the neck, also the neck and throat, these areas. Then we'll move further. So how about my chest and shoulder area? Am I experiencing any tightness, pain, stiffness in my shoulders, in my neck, upper back, sides, chest area? If I'm feeling any tightness, any stiffness, again, I just mentally send this word, not even relax, but to release. So as I exhale, as I breathe out, I release the tension from that area. Now, of course, if you're physically hurt, if there's actually physically something wrong in a particular part, then that needs medical attention. But here is just about the stresses that build up, the tensions that build up in the body without our realizing it. exploring further, paying attention to, focusing on the lower back, my arms, abdomen, then my legs, the hips, glutes, thighs, shins, ankles. All the way down to my ankles, my toes. Okay, slowly opening the eyes. How does it make you feel? That's my question. There can be a number of different things, so there's no one right answer. When you do this, what do you feel? What do you experience?
We feel more aware of our physical self. We feel like we can sense the muscles, we can feel the movement of something inside. And relaxing, obviously. Yeah.
Honestly, I couldn't feel body parts or muscle as such, but I was feeling very peaceful at mind. That's it. But the body parts, the way you were describing, I couldn't really feel that.
That's okay. Anybody else?
I feel that what's going on in our body, the mental feeling, and I can concentrate more after this. So that's
Yeah, it was a different feeling, right? So quite long time, so just sitting in a place and just closing eyes and just thinking about how the very basic thing, the breathing, that's working, and how. So that's really great. Thank you.
I feel relaxing.
So that's at least a common thread, that it kind of feels relaxing. Sorry.
Actually, what you said to think about, but I couldn't stop thinking other things. It came in continuous basis. Along with that, I continued with breathing, and as you said, I went down through the body. But other thoughts didn't stop. It came in pouring. That is the problem.
All of which is great. Both the relaxing part and that part. So the relaxing part, it tells us that, you know, just to, like our brains are constantly on overdrive, and just to allow them to not be that for a few minutes itself sort of allows us to relax so much. Because, I mean, again, something very obvious, but we don't think about this. Just as it takes energy to do things physically, so it actually takes a lot of energy for our brain functions as well, right? I mean, you know, the energy that the brain requires to regulate and control the whole body, as well as the whole psychological process, etc. There's a certain figure, like, I'm forgetting the exact percentage, but a significant percentage of our entire caloric input essentially goes to the brain, like is used up by the brain, so to say. At the same time, that also, that again, how difficult it is to like push out our thoughts, and so that is not the point. So the whole thing of this kind of an exercise, also what you mentioned. So see, the whole thing is that there's no right or wrong way of doing this. Anything goes essentially. It's essentially about observing what is going on. So about being able or not being able to feel or be aware of different parts of the body. That's just something that comes just with a little bit of practice. I mean, if you, again, just closed your eyes and specifically thought about your right hand, I mean, there's a better way of doing on this. If you closed your eyes and tried very hard not to think about your right hand, then that is what you will think about more than anything else. It's a very well-known psychological thing. Like, you know, if you're trying to, like, okay, I'm not going to think about that, I'm not going to think about that, of course you think about that. So here it's just that. You kind of bring your mental focus. That, again, there are technical ways of explaining this. The way the body is aware of itself, right? So the technical itself and its surroundings. The technical term for that is proprioception, actually. I mean, we talk about it more in terms of movement, but here also essentially that's what's going on. Like your consciousness turns on itself, turns on the body. Why should one do something like this, and not just for 2 minutes? It can be done for a minute or two also, but it can be done for much longer. So it's like this. If you are an athlete, say a footballer or a cricketer, then you don't spend all your time only practicing your football or cricket skills. You actually do a lot of other drills and strength and conditioning exercises. You run, etc., etc. Build up the skills which in turn feed into the tennis or the football or the cricket. Here, what we are training our minds to do is purely to pay attention, to focus. Once we build up that skill, then that can be turned to different things. So here it's kind of like base building work. We can think of it that way, purely from a productivity perspective, that what are the, I mean, there are like, you know, hundreds, probably thousands of research papers that would explain this way more eloquently than I am. But yeah, they're like proven benefits and outcomes of this, that just this practice of just sitting down, closing your eyes and focusing on your breath and slowly increasing the time durations for which you do that. Just as if you're going to the gym and lifting weights, it gradually increases your capacity to lift weights. So today I start maybe just with 10 kgs and then moves to 15 and 20 and then 50 and so on and so forth. So, but again, what is the purpose of that? Some people are happy just to do that, lift weights and become bodybuilders, etc. But it also makes you stronger. So then you physically, like in so-called real life, you're able to do more difficult things like lift up, let's say, a water jar or a gas cylinder or whatever. So, you know, it prepares you for so-called real world, real life needs. Here also, it's like a gym for the mind. So we are preparing the mind to focus. Something which is increasingly difficult for us to do. Let's be aware of that as well. Yeah. But it goes beyond that. That's like what you were talking about, that you couldn't push away the thoughts, but you were aware that there were, you know, all these thoughts going through our heads. Okay. So, probably other than when we are in deep sleep, there are, again, there's a figure that I'm now forgetting, but in an hour, there's some X thousand different thoughts passing through our heads. The thing is, most of the times we do not have an objective distance from that. So we are kind of immersed in the thought. We self-identify with the thought. And that means that quite often we are reacting from a kind of habituated space or from a space we're reacting without awareness, especially when it comes to emotions. Like somebody says something, I get angry, and before I realize that I'm angry, I've reacted in some ways. Quite often seen on roads when people fight with each other in the traffic, or passengers get angry. Like the bus that I was coming in, this guy was like really testing everyone's patience, as they do. Like standing everywhere for upwards of 5 minutes, and I was telling Shoptoshi, like inviting people from their homes almost. We all know how it goes. Sunday afternoon, so it's trying to fill up the bus, and so I was just watching the whole thing. So every successive stop, the conductor, I'm sure, was getting a kind of a sadistic pleasure out of it, because he just kept doing it more and more and more. There can be a psychological analysis of that also, but then people kept getting more and more pissed. So then people are shouting, and then they're shouting even more. Whether that's going to have some effect or not is secondary. The point is, are we aware of what we're doing, or we're just kind of reacting, from instinct? Greater chances are that the conductor doesn't really give a damn. He's not going to move any faster just because people are shouting, unless like everyone really starts, getting very nasty. So all we're achieving there is like upsetting our own mental balance and peace of mind. I mean, since we know that it is like this, especially on, Sunday afternoon, so if we had to get to somewhere in a hurry, we should have started earlier. It's as simple as that. Watching our breath is never just watching our breath. This is the part that we will not go into so much in depth today, because that part cannot happen in 2 minutes, but just mentioning that then what happens is that by watching our breath, we develop the ability to watch our thoughts and emotions as well. And being able to observe something, this is again, in the physical world, we know this is a truth, and kind of true in the psychological world as well, that observing something means taking a certain distance from it, right? Like if you're observing a particle, then you affect the position of that particle, etc. I mean, you cannot be in that same place. To observe that, you must be at a certain distance from that. So similarly, when we are kind of observing our thoughts, our emotions, not just in that moment what's going on, but maybe like what's going on in general inside my head at this point in my life, so to say. So as we develop the ability to go deeper into this breath awareness, breath watching practice, then we develop the capacity to watch our thoughts as well, to watch our emotions as well, and hence like choose our emotional responses or choose our actions from a place of awareness rather than a place of reactiveness, right? Most of the times, especially when it comes to strong emotions like anger or fear or whatever, we respond out of instinct, just as animals do. Most of the times we're doing that. But then it can be better than that. We can be aware in real time. So here, what you're doing is you're taking time out, you're specifically sitting, meditating, etc., and developing the capacity to watch your emotions. What that leads on to is in the real world, like you're at work, you're speaking with a colleague, or at a client presentation, something. And anything that happens in life, we're having thoughts and emotions. Not just thoughts, but also emotions. We may not be aware of it, but any external stimuli that comes in, stimulus that comes in, we have, our brain processes it in a certain way, and we have an emotional response to it. May not be something that we identify as like a higher order emotion, but it could just be a feeling, a sensation, something like that. Yeah. So in those situations, we are aware in real time of what's going on with us. Like going back to this bus scenario again, I was also getting annoyed, obviously, because his he was being annoying and probably, you know, quite intentionally. So it's like deliberately staying in one place, and the driver's about to start, and he sort of stops the bus again, etc., etc. But then, yeah. But then, like, as I was getting annoyed, I kind of was also aware that, okay, I'm getting annoyed. So then you have a choice. Okay, does it make sense to me right now to give vent to this annoyance or anger or whatever? Is it likely to achieve anything, or is it just likely to be a wastage of energy? And one figures that in that instance, just to scream and shout at the conductor, like, it's not beneficial for me. In that, you know, in that moment, I mean, I'm kind of at their mercy, so like just, you know, endure it as long as it takes. And that is true for many, many situations in life, work, whatever, that just being able to take a step back, watch what's going on, and then to ask ourselves, what is the ideal response? Or the way I'm just about to respond, is that going to serve my purpose? Is that going to help me? That quite often is very, very helpful. It stops us from doing things that ultimately, and acting and behaving in ways that actually don't help us or serve our purpose, so to say. Yeah, again, this is something so obvious and self-evident that it's very easy to miss the point, which is why I'm kind of, you know, repeating it again and again. And it's not just that the breath is disconnected from all these things. The thing is that our breath pattern changes for every thought and every emotion that we have. It's again something that's very self-evident. When you're feeling angry, just think of, in your mind, think of a situation when you've been angry. When you're feeling angry, the way you breathe. When you're feeling very happy, you're like out with friends, you're enjoying the way you breathe. When you're feeling sad, or at least, you know, a little, like, yeah, a little low for some reason, the way you breathe. All these things are different. I mean, the breath changes with each of these. Not just emotions, but it changes with thoughts also. Of course, thoughts and emotions are connected. Like if you're thinking something that's making you angry, so then, yes, there's a connection between that thought and that emotion. And the breath changes. Okay, this is an autonomous process most of the times. But we can develop awareness of this. Again, what is the benefit? It's a kind of reverse engineering, that as soon as I'm aware of what's happening to my breath, I'm objectively aware of what's going on with me emotionally, psychologically, etc. And what I'm aware of, I can regulate. So just to be aware that, okay, I'm becoming agitated. How do I know that? I'm beginning to hyperventilate or something like that. At least the breath is coming faster and so on and so forth, right? Or that I'm feeling overwhelmed with anxiety or stress. That's again a huge, I mean, how we deal with those things comes later, but at least to be aware first and foremost, right? So every single thought or emotion experienced in life affects the state of this whole system, and most recognizably it manifests in the breath. So if we develop this power of being able to observe the breath and minute fluctuations in the breath, then we develop the power to observe our emotional state or our psychological state. It's as simple but as powerful as that. So we observe and then we can change it. That is the next part, that by regulating the breath, by changing the breath, we can actually induce different emotional states in ourselves. Sounds weird, but it's again clinically highly researched, studied, proven, etc. But before that, as I said, that long periods of sitting themselves are like one of the most harmful things, and we've been doing a lot of that. So the other kind of mindfulness practice that can happen, not just sitting and closing your eyes, is just getting up. And they call this walking meditation. So in Zen meditation practice and all, they do this a lot. It's very simple. You just walk, but you walk with a certain deliberateness. So you just go, like typically you can put your hands behind or something or keep them here, doesn't matter. But you take each step in a very deliberate way. Typically, people just go up and down, but since we are kind of in a small space, you can just go here and there a little. Looking straight ahead, but here also, even if you're walking, your focus is on your breath. Instead of closing our eyes, now we have opened up our eyes, we are open to all the stimuli that are coming in, but your focus is still on your breath. So I'll just keep the mic for a second and just model this. So typically just holding a fixed gaze, like if you're going there, you continue to look there until you reach a certain predetermined point, turn, go somewhere else like that. And again, we'll just do this for 1 minute. Okay. Start. Is it possible that we do this way? So anyway, yeah. So you can just like walk up. Yeah. Just, yeah, we can just push the chairs a little, make some more space. One second. Ready? And let's start. Yeah, anywhere, just anywhere in this space. If you feel more comfortable looking down, look down. It's nothing, it's just walking, but again, walking in life is something that you do without awareness, most of the times. Think about that. Slow down a lot. Take each step in a very deliberate way. So I said the focus has to be on the breath, right? How do we do that? Let me show. Typically what happens is, as you are lifting the leg, you breathe in. As you're stepping down, you exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale, like that. Again, this is something profoundly simple, but not at all easy. Okay, let's come back to our seats. So first of all, again, that's like a really, really helpful thing to do in terms of detaching, then reattaching, refocusing, etc. So you're working on something for a long time and, you know, as is natural, slowly the brain starts shutting off and all. So at a certain periodic interval, just get up and walk for a minute or two. So we do this, right? But typically what do? We just go out for a smoke, etc., etc. You can still do all of that. No judgments. But these are some techniques which are, again, you know, scientifically studied and proven to be much better in terms of, again, finding the energy to focus on work. And in general, it's not just about work and productivity. For our overall well-being as well. So again, this is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy because immediately we become self-conscious, etc. It's like, what's going on? Why am I doing this? All of that is valid. It's just whatever's going on in my head, am I aware of it, or am I so deeply immersed in it that, you know, I'm kind of totally identifying with that in that moment, right? These are like two very common techniques of mindfulness practice, the so-called Zen meditation or something. The first one is like you're going inside your own world, but then we ultimately have to live and work in the world, so to say. So when you're doing it with your eyes open, the walking meditation practice, it's like you're open to everything around you and at the same time you're focused on yourself. Yeah? I mean, it doesn't have to be like going around in a specific way for a minute or something. Something as simple as you just get up from your chair and just kind of, you know, take a, like, a little more space than this, but you just take one circle around, go around, again, in a deliberate way, come and sit down again. It's as simple as that. It feels a little weird because I've never tried to do this holding a mic. I mean, normally I wouldn't, but that's okay. You're just like decoupling your mind from whatever it is that you were doing, allowing it to just, go still, relax, and then focusing on whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. Again, it really works a lot. I mean, okay. So far, we've only spoken about and experienced a couple of different techniques of just watching the breath, right? Observing the breath. And what we are finding out or becoming aware of is that watching the breath is never just literally about that. It's much more than that. It's a profoundly simple practice, but it's one of those really simple practices that can go on lifelong. And, the more we do it, the deeper layers and nuances. So it starts from becoming more aware of your own body, something that, as you said, not being able to feel. So in the present world especially, we're profoundly disconnected from our bodies, right? Because we don't really do things physically anymore. You don't even really need to go out to buy stuff. Even that, we just order on the phone and it's being delivered to us. So we're hardly doing anything physical. So the mind-body connect, the body-brain connect is really, really weakened. Are we aware of our own bodies? Most of the times we are not. So the first thing that we started with, it's typically called a scanning, like a mental scanning. At first it may not work, but after you do it a few times, then you'll suddenly see that you're at least developing more awareness of your body. Like, what's going on with my body in this moment? Often there may be it might be feeling stiff in a certain place and you're not even aware of it, and so on and so forth. Or am I experiencing tightness and tension anywhere? It's as simple as that. Am I breathing in a free and natural way, or is my breath constrained, etc.? So first and foremost, it's developing awareness of the body. Then it's developing awareness of the thoughts and emotions. And to develop awareness of the thoughts and emotions is to kind of, I wouldn't use the word control, but to be on top of my emotions, so to say, rather than my emotions being on top of me. So it's essentially a process of deepening self-awareness. Because what are you observing? You're observing yourself. Not through a lot of intellectualization, etc., but direct observation, right? As simple as that. It's just purely through experience, through observing. Starts from observing the breath, goes on to observing different states of the body, then goes on to observing your thoughts and emotions. But that is me. All these things make up who I am, what I am, right? So that means I'm observing me, I'm observing myself, I'm developing a deeper awareness of myself. And again, people who go in depth into this kind of practice, tons of studies show that their own self-awareness, what's called in the world of emotional intelligence, what they call self-regulation, emotional regulation, etc., that increases how they communicate with the rest of the world, that becomes more effective, etc., etc. But next comes the breath itself. Beyond just watching it, there's a bit more to it. So something that might sound really strange, But most of us, and by that I mean about maybe like over 99%, especially of adult urban humans, we do not breathe correctly, like we've forgotten how to breathe. When you watch a very young child, 6 months, up to a year maybe, little older than that, or when you watch an animal, a pet dog or a cat, how they breathe is with the entire body. Like when a very young child breathes, so the whole body kind of expands and contracts, like that, right? The tummy, the chest, everything. Same with the dog or the cat. It breathes with its whole trunk, the whole body. Most of us, again, we do not realize it, but most of us only breathe to about half or less of our pulmonary potential, like, like how deeply we can breathe. We only do half of it. Why? Because we are mostly doing what's called chest breathing, only through this part of the body, right? So even when we are told to do deep breathing, like you go to the doctor and the doctor says, okay, like take a deep breath. What do most people do? We do this. So you can see visibly the shoulders going up and down. That's the normal way of breathing. Is it natural? No. What is the natural way of breathing? The most important muscle in breathing, in respiration, is this, the diaphragm. Yeah, it's not here, not your intercostal muscles. All of them play a role. It's not the abdominal muscles. Sometimes, like in theater and all that, or in certain techniques, people tell you to do belly breathing, which is then you're just breathing through here, like that, like some pranayama techniques, etc. So as specific exercises, those are fine, but that's again not your natural way of breathing. Your natural way of breathing is that exactly here, just this part, so where the rib cage ends and the stomach, the abdomen begins, right there, where it feels a little like a stretched membrane. That's the diaphragm, right? That is actually, it's one of the strongest muscles in the body if we work it properly, first of all. And that is the most important breathing muscle. So how do we reorient our breathing? First, let's figure out the how, and then we'll work on the why. It's simple. When we are inhaling, you can very lightly keep your hand here. You guys have both your hands free, so like keep one here and one here. Do not put any pressure. It's just as a guide, very, very lightly. Okay. Now, when you're inhaling, you want to see these hands expand. Okay? So not here, not just this, not just that, here. So when you're breathing in, you want to see the hand or hands expand like this. When you're breathing out, you want to see it gently collapse back. Again. Right? Diaphragmatic breathing. It's literally called that. Diaphragmatic breathing. Yes. When you're first trying to do it intentionally, it might feel even more stressful and that, okay, you're feeling that your breath goes shallow. The reason for that is, sometimes when we are first consciously trying to do diaphragm breathing, we end up closing what's called the glottis here at the back of the throat, that little valve-like thing. So very simply, when you are, like, at least when we were kids and you had a cold and you got these menthol drops or something. So what happens when you take that? You get this cold sensation, like, so when you're doing this, the part of the throat where you're feeling that cold air, that's what I'm talking about. That's the glottis, right? So that closes up. If that closes up, then not enough air is going in. So we have to keep this open also. Just this, like you just make sure that this is open. So let's just try this for a minute. Right, okay. So, how does that make you feel? When you do the diaphragm breathing, how does it make you feel? Okay, and others? Like, how is it different from otherwise? Like, okay, now we are back to so-called normal. This, and as soon as you start doing this, what changes? That's what I'm inviting you or asking you to try and articulate. Like, we're just all sitting and listening and watching and speaking without paying any particular attention to the breath. And now we're paying particular attention to the breath and we're breathing with the diaphragm, through the diaphragm. What changes? What changes in your body? What, if anything, changes in your mind? What are the changes that you experience?
More in-depth breathing, it seems like.
Yeah, okay.
As compared to the normal what we do.
Right. So how would you describe that feeling? Like, so how does it make you feel, is my question.
It's like it is filled up.
Yeah. Because you literally are, see, we talk about abdominal breathing, but biologically, of course, you can't breathe into the abdomen. You're breathing here. Yes, but what you're really doing is you are engaging a larger complex of muscles and tissues, fascia also, the whole myofascial system, etc., which in turn allows the lungs to expand much more. That's what it is, because first of all, we kind of roughly think of the lungs as somewhere here, but the majority of the lungs are further down and they're closer to our back. 3/4 of the lungs are towards your back, not towards the chest, if we actually look at a 3D model, because the lung is not a two-dimensional thing like this, right? It's kind of, you know, like this bread loaf-like thing, and so majority of it is closer to here and closer to the back, which is why it's sometimes when accidentally people get pierced by things from the back also, so it pierces the lung, right? Not just from here. So that's why it feels like it's filling up. But beyond that, like, what is the psychological sensation or feeling that we get?
I feel like it's fresh, more fresh.
Just from a few seconds of doing it, right? And the more you're able to slow it down, you'll see that, you know, that feeling of freshness or relaxation will increase. So what this kind of simple diaphragmatic breathing does, it has like numerous benefits, but it stimulates what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. So we have two parts to the CNS, the central nervous system, right? The so-called sympathetic part and the so-called parasympathetic part. What does the sympathetic nervous system do? Mainly regulates, guides our stress response in everyday, like, you know, social media or popular science terminology. It's what's called the fight, flight, freeze, fawn kind of response. So we normally say fight, flight, and freeze, but there's a fourth part to it where you just go, literally the deer in headlight kind of thing. So fight, flight, freeze, that's a freeze part. But sometimes, like, you know, an animal feels threatened and it'll try, like what a weaker dog does in front of a stronger dog, just goes like that and tries to kind of like play weak, and so like that's fawning quite literally. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, that's more from, so that's the stress and anxiety sort of response. And given the kind of realities we live with, that's where we are most of the times. Most of our waking responses are stress responses, leading on to chronic issues, autoimmune issues, etc., etc. The parasympathetic system, I'm not any expert, just very basic level of reading. So, but the parasympathetic system, and particularly a very important part of it, which is called the vagus nerve, which is one of the longest nerves of the body, goes from somewhere there all the way down to our gut. So it's the longest nerve in the body. That regulates what's called the rest and digest response, which is like the polar opposite of the stress response, right? So that's when, yeah, you're feeling deeply restful. So yeah, when we eat and then, the body goes into digestion mode, that's what's at work. Also connected with the ability to think more deeply, or creative thinking, etc., etc. So it's one of the most higher productivity, efficiency, all these things that are like, actually being studied by some of the most cutting-edge neuroscientists, human performance, so to say, as well as like popular social media, popular science. We're talking about these things all the time. This term that became super popular during the pandemic, resilience, and so on and so forth. All these things are connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, and the vagus nerve plays a huge, important role in that. So then how to stimulate the vagus nerve, etc. Apparently, like, the best and the simplest way is this kind of deep abdominal breathing. Yeah, so that's one of the biggest benefits of practicing intentional, not abdominal, I'm sorry, diaphragmatic breathing. Just even a few minutes of that, like a couple of minutes of that, stimulates the vagus nerve. Scientists call it vagal toning, actually. They measure it through, you can't directly measure it, but it's measured through heart rate variability, etc., etc. It's like a lot of technical aspects to it. But just doing this, the reason it makes you feel fresh, etc., is that when you're just doing something as simple as this, just keeping your hands there and preferably sitting up and going like, it's just that is stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system, that's stimulating the vagus nerve. And to make a kind of sustained practice of it, like, let's say you just do this for 1 minute, 3 to 4 times a day, that has a significant observable effect on, how we are able to stay calm and regulated, focused, like be able to focus more, be more mindful, concentrate more, etc., etc. If you can do more of that, even better. So plus, that's one like huge thing, that how it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And the simple ability to breathe deeper is connected with higher immunity levels, even higher longevity levels. Like if we look at some of the most long-lived populations, that would be people like Koreans, Japanese, in certain cases the Chinese also. And you see all those cultures, they culturally have very deep traditions of different breathing practices, or practices that combine movement with deep, slow breathing, like Tai Chi, etc., etc. Zen meditation obviously is like, comes from originally comes from India, but then traveled around and then became Zen meditation in Japan. Simple point, without complicating too much, I'm trying to make is this thing of deep, intentional practice of deep, slow breathing and hence the ability to take things slow. That's one of the biggest things. Like, we are living at such frenetic paces all the time. And you look at Japan, on the one hand, it's like things happen at express pace, like some of the fastest trains and, you know. But on the other hand, their culture is also marked by a kind of deep slowness. This walking meditation I was doing is a Japanese technique. It's part of what they call Zazen practices. So, I learned it not from a Japanese person, a Buddhist monk who was Burmese by birth from Myanmar, but he'd traveled and he used to teach and all. So there it was like literally to cross a 10-meter space, you could take 10 minutes. As in, you'd slow things down so much. So that again kind of gives you the ability to deeply observe things, to kind of look underneath the surface, etc. And that's why they have so much, like, I mean, we think of the Japanese and we think of this deep mental stillness kind of a thing, right? But also in terms of longevity, one of some of the longest lived cultures in the world. It's so simple that it's difficult to believe that so much can come out of just a simple practice like this. But if you try, even for a short period of time, you begin to notice changes. You begin to notice changes physically, but more importantly, you begin to notice changes mentally or emotionally in terms of, like, you know, how you feel most of the times, how you self-relate, like your own self-image, etc., how you think of yourself as a person, so on and so forth. Just this simple practice of deep diaphragmatic breathing. The key is to slow this down as much as possible. Can't always be the case, again, in the midst of things, but every now and then you can take these breathing breaks. And the more you do it, then it goes into the muscle memory. So your overall breathing becomes slower and slower. So if you can bring it down to about 5 or 6 breaths in a minute, so that's kind of like ideal. Normally, like when our thoughts are rushing and we're operating at, like, you know, a breakneck pace, we're doing much more than that. We're probably doing double of that, like taking 10 to 12 breaths a minute or something. And then when you're super stressed or anxious, then you're hyperventilating. You go like, like that, right? But if we can train our bodies and minds, takes time, it's a slow process, but by doing this over and over, if we can train our bodies and minds to come down to this base level of 5 to 6 breaths a minute, which means roughly each inhalation, exhalation cycle is taking you about 10 to 12 seconds, right? So we actually ourselves begin to see like distinct changes. We begin, like, we can observe the changes ourselves. So this is to tie this back to, you know, the like workplace and like ways in which we can be more productive, less stressed, etc. So other than just the mindfulness meditation, this is again another thing to program into our schedule. Whether you're studying or you're working, it doesn't matter. This is also something that you can literally do anywhere. You can be sitting in a bus, you can be sitting in the metro, with or without closing your eyes. You can just go into a little capsule, so to say, of intentional deep breathing, right? It's just kind of retreating into oneself and then coming back out, so to say. So another way in which we can, like, we can program these into our schedules, right? So you're working, nothing. Just stop for 1 minute. If you can't even give 2 minutes, just stop for 1 minute. Just do this, you know. Our minds usually thrive on structure. So we do just 5 deep diaphragmatic breaths. Then continue as usual, like that. The important thing here is that to do it correctly, you should be able to feel the body expanding in all directions. So I typically ask people to visualize this image of a balloon. So when you put air into a balloon, it doesn't go into any one direction, right? It just expands everywhere at the same rate if the air is coming in at a constant rate and all that. Similarly, so this part goes forward, the sides of your rib cages expand sidewise, and even the back, so you feel the shoulder blades kind of expanding and growing apart from each other with the inhalation, and then everything collapses back onto the center with the exhalation. Again, everything expands, everything collapses like that. To add a little more physical involvement to that, because again, the more tangible something is, the mind can process it better, etc. We can do something, simply something like this. Try. So it's nothing really, it's just still the expansion and contraction of the diaphragm. I'm not moving from my shoulder, I'm just keeping my hand here, and because the diaphragm is expanding, so the arm also just does that. It looks a little like Tai Chi or fake Tai Chi or whatever, but the principles are the same. So what they do in things like Tai Chi and Qigong are based on similar principles biologically. They just have a belief system of Qi and all that around it. Nothing, it's just easier for your brain to process when you're doing this and feel even more relaxed because you get this sense of, there's a very symmetric, harmonious movement, right? So it enhances that feeling of relaxation in the same way that when you listen to music, especially again, like, you know, you get all this meditation music like stuff, is just like a very steady frequency, so it helps the brain to relax. That's all. So again, something that can be part of a wellness practice. Yeah. See, these two things, I've essentially shared two things in all this time. Two really simple things, but which are of profound importance, and you can just keep going deeper and deeper into it. So the first one was just the breath observation, mindfulness meditation, if you want to call it that, where we start just by observing the breath just for a very short time. So you can just program in those, like the 1 minute break or the 2 minute break. But as you go deeper into it, it can grow longer. So you're just building your mental muscles that way, so to say, the ability to just purely stay focused, concentrate, etc., etc. But then you additionally develop the ability to deeply observe, deeply yet in a detached way, observe your thoughts and your emotions. In other words, observe ourselves. So that was just the mindfulness meditation part of it, that, okay, that's what comes out of it, and that's why it contributes a lot to well-being, so to say, right? But there's no breath regulation involved in that. It perhaps automatically happens because if you just sit and meditate for a long time, your body automatically goes into a sort of a very deep state. But then comes intentionally regulating the breath. And here also we're not talking about like any complicated pranayama or something, not saying we shouldn't do those, though they're immensely valuable, all the different pranayama techniques that we have. Even other than pranayama, there are just very basic breathwork techniques, what's called a box breathing. So the same diaphragmatic breathing, let me quickly share that, it will just take 30 seconds. It's nothing. It's the same diaphragmatic breathing, But what you're going to do is, you're going to breathe in over a slow count of 2. So like something in your head goes like 1, 2, as slow as that. So it's about 7 to 10 seconds. Hold that breath for the same amount of time, a count of 2. Exhale over a count of 2, and again hold, like don't breathe in, hold for a count of 2. So breathe in over a count of 2, like hold. Hold. Box breathing, as in a square. So you're going 2, 2, 2, 2. Yeah, it's just giving a further structure to this diaphragm breathing. Again, shown to have the ability to calm down the mind, regulate stress response, etc. So something as nothing could be more accessible. As long as we are alive, we are breathing. So you need nothing else. The most powerful tool that we have is already in us. You just need to access your breathing. And it can just be pure diaphragm breathing, as slow as possible, without any further structure. Or you can try this box breathing. You can try breathing in over a count of 2 and then breathing out over a count of 4. So to extend the exhalation more and more and more slowly, because it's the exhalation part which helps with the stress response, by the way, like bringing down the stress response. Again, these are just things I know as facts by, reading up on the literature. The real reasons and all that, then one has to go into the research studies. But it's when you do a deep, controlled exhalation, that's what brings down your stress levels, literally reduces cortisol levels in the body, etc. So it's not the inhaling part. It's not this part. It's this part, which gives you that feeling of relaxation that you feel, has something to do with the oxygen-carbon dioxide balance in the blood, etc., etc., but I wouldn't claim any expertise on that. Withholding breath has its own medical advantages, like the longer you can go without breathing in, you're holding the breath, increases pulmonary capacity, which obviously has health benefits. Yeah, again, but no expertise on that. It's just something I know as a fact. Okay, so that, do we have time? Yeah, I'll just wrap up, but just to finish with this. So just one more step that we can go beyond this. So I always typically share this, 3 very specific breathing exercises. The basis is just that same diaphragmatic breathing, just this. But now we're going to do it with eyes open, and the first one is you have to make a very, very, very small opening in the lips, as if like blowing out a candle, or, well, people who are smokers, essentially when you are exhaling the smoke. And so it's like this. So you notice 2 things. One is that I'm keeping a kind of what I call soft focus with the eyes. It's focused. I'm looking at one point, but it's not like a hard focus kind of. It's like a kind of diffused gaze at a distance, whatever is in front of you. And how did I breathe out? more instead of just looking at one point. It could be. So just letting your gaze drift over the space, but again in a very intentional way. That is the only difference. So for something to be intentional, obviously something in the brain is working. That is not working otherwise, right? I mean, when I'm just doing it habitually, so something is not functioning, but when I do it intentionally, so then it becomes a deliberate choice, a deliberate act. I'm choosing to do this. Yeah? So this, in my experience, it's something I've used in a theater context, like before a show, to sort of build that. You need to be relaxed and concentrated at the same time. That's the issue. In many situations in life, theater, athletics or sports performance, like any situation which is some kind of a test in front of people, so to say. And so there's fear, there's anxiety, etc. So you need two things at the same time. You need relaxation, at the same time you need concentration and focus. So they kind of seem to be at cross purposes at times. But no, both of them can coexist. And this is one of the things I've seen that are tremendously helpful. Yeah, you can try it out. You'll again notice yourself immediately. It's just like keeping that diffuse gaze, looking in front, like far away, whatever is in front of you. And the key thing here is the tiny opening in the lips and breathing. Why? Because when the breath is concentrated like that and you're aware of it, that the exhalation is going through this very concentrated stream of air, so the mind gets something to focus on. It focuses on that narrow channel of breath. So you practice a kind of relaxed concentration. Yeah, let's just for 10 seconds try it out. Breathe in. It just brings this, for lack of a better word, a kind of heightened sense of awareness, isn't it? What you're aware of doesn't matter, but you're triggering this sense of awareness. You're just looking at random chairs and what, but it doesn't matter. It could be anything. You could be sitting in your room. What you're doing here is you're triggering a certain brain state. So what you're looking at is immaterial. And this, again, it enhances your powers of concentration. So the thing is that a lot of things can be simulated in the brain without it being real. And quite often that happens. Like this whole fight, flight, freeze thing, again, it dates back to hunter-gatherer time. So it might have started when there was literally a saber-toothed tiger charging down at us. And now we don't have saber-toothed tigers charging down at us. We have maybe some office crisis or whatever. But the brain doesn't know how to differentiate. So that's what we call the amygdala hijack and all that, the part of the medulla which is called the amygdala, which deals with this kind of crisis situations. For the brain, it is still a metaphorical saber-toothed tiger that is rushing at us. It really doesn't know how to distinguish. So it goes into a similar response. And here we are kind of, figuring out how to gently negate that and build more healthy, beneficial brain responses, so to say. So this is simulating in you a heightened sense of relaxed, yet a kind of relaxed alertness, perception, like you're extra observant. When you're doing this, you're probably more keenly aware, okay, those brass tacks and, the color and texture of the pelmets and everything, right? But that same ability to watch and observe then comes in handy in other situations. Things like sports and athletics or martial arts, etc. Or any situation that requires of you to be extra perceptive and responsive. So it helps us to enter what modern psychologists call the flow state, which is like one of the most widely talked about things, and it's so widely talked about that I'm not going to go into it now. But a state of heightened performance, let's just put it simply that way, a heightened state of performance. We've all experienced it at times in any field. Could be when you're singing a song and you just get into the flow. We talk about it, right? Getting in the flow of things. Could be when you were solving some maths problems and all of a sudden, like you suddenly hit this zone and you just go. So that, yeah. So just like this one, the last thing that I'll share. So one more breathing exercise, very similar to this, except here you breathe in and then you make this. Let's try it out and then we'll see what that makes us feel. So breathing in is the same through the diaphragm. Now open your eyes, open your face, like open up everything and like open your mouth. It makes us self-conscious, I know. It's a difficult thing to do, but that's exactly what we need to do, right? Yes. Like sighing, like a sigh. Dirghoshash, as we say in Bangla. Like, so what does that make you feel? When we breathe out like that, like a kind of a... What do we feel when we do that? That is because we do it when we are tired. But why do we do it when we are tired? Not getting energy, but this is the body's own way, even animals do it, of down-regulating stress. So this particular breathing technique, with or without a sound, you can actually induce a sound. So you can go, yeah? The reason we do it when we're tired, because when we're tired, we also are usually fatigued and stressed, and this literally drops the stress, so to say. So it's not making you tired, it's actually trying to bring down the stress level. Yeah, so you can do it just as the breath, just as the exhalation, like. Now, the feeling of I'm super tired is when you do it like this. That's a sigh. But if you do it a little more steadily like this, then you'll feel more of what I'm talking about, a sense of relief, for lack of a better word. Suddenly, no. So just try that. Last thing we do, just same, that thing, but steady breathing out. So inhale and from the diaphragm. So we're kind of pushing the diaphragm in. Yeah. May or may not work the first time, but if you try a few times, you'll see that what it makes you feel, again, is this sense of like, stillness and steadiness, like that. So like this, there are many, many other breathing techniques. Can combine like little facial exercises with it. Again, the amount of stress we have manifests a lot here. You know, like a facial muscles, etc. It gets all wrinkled, and we look prematurely aged. Eyes, most of us all the times are kind of squinting. You know, we don't really open our eyes as much. So something that combines breathing with what these days people are calling face yoga, which I find a somewhat stupid term. It's just facial exercises. You breathe in and you just go, just opening things up. Just that, like raise your eyebrow. We don't do this, right? We don't really open our faces anyway, especially because of the amount of time we spend on our screens. So that makes us literally dull. It makes us look duller than we otherwise would. So imagine that oxygen going to all the cells here and just do like, Just that. Just try it out and you'll immediately feel a sense of energy. Like, open your eyes wide even if it looks funny. Don't bother. Like, just open everything in the face. Yes. Yeah. It just gives a shot of energy, right? Nothing else, but just like, I've got more energy. Okay, and now back to normal. But normal doesn't have to be this. See, this is our everyday phase. This is what, there's like most people in 2022, but it can at least be this. And the people who just are able to do this much, they kind of appear like something extraordinary to us, like having presence and all that. It's nothing, it's just having that much little awareness. Yeah. So this is another exercise I do myself. I share with people that, again, every now and then you can just take a break and you just, with two hands, works better. I'm just doing it with one. As if you've got imaginary bands between the fingers and the skin of the face, and you just go. Stretching everything. Try it out, try it out. It might feel funny, but you'll feel the effect immediately. Just hold the hand like this, yes. By the way, it's a Kathakali exercise. So it comes from our own cultural heritage. So I'm taking this from the Kerala dance theatre form, Kathakali. So they do these exercises for the eyes and the face and all that because they have to express a lot, right? Most of us, irrespective of our domain knowledge, have become very, when it comes to communication, we've become very poor communicators and we're very poor at expressing. And a lot of communication has to do with the energy you project subtly through your gestures and facial expressions and all that. And we are no longer capable of projecting emotions through the face. So that's where I picked it up. Like for a Kathakali artist, they do all that, like all that stuff, right? So they have to have super expressive faces and eyes, right? For them, the purpose is only on the Kathakali stage. But those exercises have this potential of just giving this shot of energy and over time making us more expressive. So face, similarly with the eyebrows, it can be like, inhale, lift up like that, drop back to normal. Lift up, drop back to normal. Actually strengthens your eyes also. And in conclusion, because we only accept things when they come from the West, so there's this Harvard psychologist called Amy Cuddy. Her TED Talk is still the most watched TED Talk of all times at some 25 million views or something. So she did a lot of research and came up with this whole concept that she calls power posing, which then she went on to train top, Fortune 100 executives and all that and made extraordinary amounts of money. But all she's saying is that by taking big, powerful stances with the body, whether standing or seated, powerful stances with the body and facial expressions, we induce those feelings in the mind. Because again, the brain cannot distinguish between reality and whatever signal is being given to it. And she went on to kind of come up with a set of such postures, etc., which is what she teaches. But when I look at it and I look at our own background of, Indian traditions and classical dances and all that, I can see that what she's teaching, it's great, it's her own work, but it's like reinventing the wheel and it's comparatively much more superficial to what we already have. So then, what I'm advocating here, it might not feel as bizarre because then there's the Western seal of approval behind it. But essentially it's simple. If you put your body in that kind of a state, you cannot in your mind feel nervous or afraid at the same time. So I coach people to, like, for public speaking, etc., also. And it's one of the tricks that I teach, that before going on stage, if you put your body in, like, this kind of a stance, you're actually inducing that kind of so-called heroic energy. Veera rasa is what we call it in our tradition. It's just as if I sit like that, I cannot feel powerful. Not for that second. If you just go into like, it will induce in the mind a sense of nervousness and anxiety and all that. That's how it works. Nervousness and anxiety will make you do this, but doing that will make you feel nervousness and anxiety. So just like that, if you do something like that, it will make you feel that sense of strength and power, etc., etc. Yeah? Okay. There's no end to this, so I'll kind of stop here for now. But we can spend 5 minutes, like, you know, any questions? It's huge, but I'm again just going to stress on the fact that it's so simple. So, you know, this so-called holistic well-being thing that I'm trying to share, the part that I didn't get into today, also because I'm holding a mic, is like certain physical bodily practices, stretches, etc., hopefully another time. But even just what we shared is just super, super simple. Just observing the breath, breathing in a certain way, diaphragmatic breathing, then the specific exercises which I shared, which just focuses your attention in specific ways, nothing else. And then these face and eye exercises, they're all so simple, like it cannot be more simple than that. And that's what makes them so profound and powerful. It's like the resources are here already. We don't need something fancy from outside or some supplement or this or that. Nope. It's all here. And it's actually studied over and over that especially breathing practices, they have immense positive benefits for physical health, mental health, immunity, etc. To the point that, yeah, I mean, even for COVID, like, you know, in hospitals and all that, I saw some videos, they did a lot of pulmonary physiotherapy, right? And some of those exercises are very, very similar. Just like getting people to breathe more deeply through the diaphragm because that is damaged, so slowly bringing it back up to speed and all. So, yeah. Any other questions or observations? Again, anything that I've just spoken very generally, so specific questions that you might have, like, okay, I struggle with this, so what can I do? Or distraction, this, that, anything. You can just take like, you know, 3-4 minutes and finish up. Any question that you might have? So the thing is that what does not work is having this big, challenging goal. Like, okay, I'm going to quit smoking tomorrow. It doesn't work. 99% of the times it doesn't work. Some people are able to go cold turkey, as they say, but most of the times it doesn't work. What does work in any situation is making incremental changes. That's again how the human brain operates, right? So how can I incrementally program in some of this? That's why I just did like these little 2-minute shots today, so to say. Because if I started the session by getting everybody to sit down and meditate for 20 minutes, it wouldn't work, right? So then you slowly increase and build up like that. So even what I've shared out of these practices, I'll share more, don't worry. It's like, okay, so how do I how do I integrate in my entire day just cumulatively 5 to 10 minutes of this? Just 10x 1 minute, just mindfulness meditation or breathing or whatever. One of the best times to do it is like as soon as we open our eyes instead of the mobile phone immediately. Even as you're lying down, you don't even need to sit up or do anything specific. Just turn your attention to the breath. There's your first 1, 2, 3, 4 minutes or something. It tunes us in a very different way to start the day. And then, as I suggested, that maybe in every 30 minutes, we keep 2 minutes. If not, in every 50 minutes, we keep every 60 minutes, we keep 2-3 minutes. like that. That's a structure that some of the biggest companies in the world are experimenting with and finding that it increases productivity. So Apple, I don't know the truth of this, Apple apparently mandates that you cannot work at a stretch for more than, you cannot sit and work at a stretch for more than an hour. So they have those standing workstations and all that. So I guess some kind of a buzzer goes, some internal app or something, but it tells you to get up, walk around, stretch, breathe, suggests what you can do. But you're not supposed to just continually work, because then your brain graph kind of goes down like that and all. So yeah, I mean, in our work day, instead of, see, we take breaks anyway, that is not the point, but again, we do that in a kind of conditioned pattern. And the difference here is intention. The word intentionality that we also hear a lot. So the techniques that I'm suggesting, they all have to be practiced with the kind of intentionality. Just as when you're doing a yoga asana or practicing a martial art like a karate kata or something, so those are practiced deliberately, intentionally. These are also things that you do with intentionality. That makes a huge difference. So just that 1 minute, just those 2 minutes when I'm doing something, whatever that something is. Honestly, you could drink a cup of tea. Yeah? That's actually a part of mindfulness practice, like, or a glass of water, but with your full attention, like what is the physical sensation as the water or the tea enters my mouth. It's actually a kind of meditation. I mean, the Japanese have taken, they have a tea ceremony, right? So they've taken it to the level of an art form. And it's a part of Zen Buddhist practice where they sit in a certain way, lift the thing, sniff it. Then mindfulness is anything to which you're bringing your full attention in the here and now. So it could be any activity, but something that you do deliberately and intentionally. Yeah? Program those in to the schedule, so to say. Cool. Shall we stop here for now? Yeah.
Thank you, Arka, for providing us this kind of session. I think we'll definitely start practicing these as a therapy. I believe it will have a therapeutic value in our lives. And going forward, we'll try to organize more events where we can bring much more participants to get the most out of this. Thank you. Thank you.